All right. Well, thanks so much, Stephen, for joining us. Really glad to
Being
get
your
the
guinea
opportunity.
pig. Your
Your guinea pig. Let's give it a go. Let's see how this thing goes. Great to talk with you, and it's been great to check out your analysis and takes online as this election or this primary election comes to a close. Um,
well,
First
that
off,
is a charitable opinion that not everyone on the internet has, but I'm glad that you've at least appreciated some of the data. I tried and shared that, and I've been struck by a lot of the data that's been put out there. But where do you want to take us?
yeah, so let's start off with first just I mean, you've been out of elected office in Arizona for year and a half now, and I think a lot of people would be interested to know what you've been getting up to in the meantime. I remember you told me a couple months ago, and I was asking you for a quote about the Board of Supervisors and Recorder feud that you were off doing bigger and better things and greener pastures. So.
Last year and a half has been glorious. So, for those elected officials who fear life after election, I can say that as long as you've got a decent skill set and you were doing something cool before, that it only gets better. And just a good reminder that life does continue, in fact. So, I'm doing a number of things. I am running a consulting firm that's a Washington, D.C. based consulting firm. Republic Affairs does a lot of nonprofit solutions. I am a lecturer and a fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. So I was there for most of the 2025 calendar year, and I'll be there again in the fall for the fall semester teaching one class. And I'm a legal scholar at the Cato Institute, which is a classical liberal libertarian think tank that is in Washington, D.C. So I travel a lot, but my family, my wife, everyone else is still here, and obviously Arizona is still home. And I follow Arizona politics closely, still, for better or for worse.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it sounds like you've been keeping busy. So let's get into things. Let's talk about the dynamics of the major GOP races. So the turning point backed and right-wing candidates at the top of the ticket all won pretty handily, and I don't think that's much of a surprise to anyone. But to start things off, what do you think that says about the primary voters in the Republican Party?
Wait, did you get all your predictions right?
Um, I didn't make any formal
Oh,
predictions. I
well,
wasn't
my
I wasn't
my
on Kalshi.
My colleague and I, we have a whiteboard in my office, and he did one better than I did. I got the superintendent of public instruction race wrong. Sorry, Kimberly, if you're listening. I got that one wrong, but congratulations to her and best wishes to Tom as he embarks, finishes up the term and then embarks on something different. So it was a little confusing as to whom President Trump had endorsed. So clearly he had endorsed Andy Biggs. Clearly he had endorsed Karen Taylor Robeson. Clearly he endorsed people like Jay Feely. But when you talk about someone like Gina Swoboda running for Secretary of State, like he endorsed her for running for Congressional District 1, but whether or not that endorsement carried over to Secretary of State. And when you talk about the Attorney General's race, he had retweeted Sonny Borelli's endorsement of Rodney Glassman. So it was like, does that translate to an endorsement of Rodney Glassman? So the president's a little harder to pin down on the map, but I think the base, the MAGA candidates, the Turning Point USA supported candidates did well overall. I don't think anyone could characterize it as a unsuccessful night. And certainly their top dog was Andy Biggs, who I think exceeded most people's expectations, which were already quite high, and had allowed him to pivot to the general election. I don't know what it'll wind up being, but it was like around 75% when I last looked, which for a multi-candidate, but really just two candidate races competing against another member of Congress, that's a significant victory.
Right. One of the things I think is interesting, you mentioned about the this tepid Glassman endorsement is basically the same thing with Swoboda. I think you retweeted
Okay.
somebody else's endorsement, and it made me think about it. Both candidates I think that weren't necessarily the MAGA, right wing picks, but it's ones that he kind of supported. It makes me wonder if he's just kind of gotten smarter about knowing, if a candidate he wants to support isn't likely to win. But after picking, some losers in the past, but so let's.
Well, losers in the general election, and yes, he's lost some in the primary, but he's done remarkably well in the primary. And based off of other races, this primary cycle, the president's word in Republican Party primaries continues to carry immense weight, which even as his standing, his approval rating has continued to dip in the country, he still has remarkably high approval within the Republican Party, historically high. I agree with your assessment of Gina. Certainly, the base and Turning Point USA had turned on her. Her rhetoric didn't really match the bases with respect to election administration, either, to her credit, in my estimation. Rodney's hard to pin down. I think Rodney's politics are whatever he thinks is politically efficacious for that day, for that meeting. And so, whether Rodney was the MAGA candidate or not, interestingly enough, Turning Point didn't really get involved in that race as much. Warren wasn't part of their slate of candidates. I suspect that stems from some of his actions as Senate Majority Leader. But yeah, so it was interesting, but I think most people predicted the outcomes of most of those races, if not all of those races.
Yeah. And then in with regard to with regard to Andy Biggs' win and his candidacy as the nominee for the Republican Party, recently the past couple of days you've tweeted twice that you have four key questions that if Biggs is gonna could clear would allow you to support him according to your pro market, pro growth, pro trade, pro school choice, regulation skeptical preferences. So, do you want to talk about those four?
Yeah, no, so well, I very much, yeah, I appreciate you repeating my political preferences, and haven't changed. I think a lot of people accuse me of having changed my political preferences. Look, I'm at the Cato Institute for a reason. I believe in free markets. I believe in free trade. I believe in a low regulatory environment. That's all good stuff. And quite frankly, Andy Biggs, that's where he was, especially as a state legislator, as a congressman, and especially recently, that's been a little different. You've seen him back off of things like the president investing the US government in private companies or the president launching Trump RX, and Andy Biggs has nothing to say about it. I think state legislator Andy Biggs would have been aghast at that. But my issues with Andy Biggs stem from how he handled the 2020 election. He was one of the chief architects of January 6th. He was one of the chief architects of denying that the president had lost the 2020 election. And it continued. He made videos. He would go speak at different precinct committee events. And one of the things that I will have a really hard time forgiving him for is when Jack Sellers and Bill Gates, County Board of Supervisors, both Republican, both had known Andy for probably 10, 15 plus years, both excellent human beings, went to Washington, D.C. in the fall of 2021 to testify as to what was going on in Maricopa County and what had happened in the 2020 election. And Andy was just awful to them, awful. And it was remarkable to me that somebody would throw away his relationships of 15 years plus, would tarnish the names of two he knows to be good men, all in fidelity for this just silly fantasy of the president's. And that really soured my opinion of Andy Biggs at that moment. And As I mentioned in that tweet, these are table stakes issues, and so I have to get over them before turning to the things that I like. Yeah, like are you going to try and lower Arizona's income tax rate even more? But
Yeah, it looks like we've got the first one was the 2020 election stole it from Trump.
yeah, and I haven't heard him say otherwise on that. Number two was it
Well,
appropriate
yeah.
to
Oh, sorry.
in mass pardon the 1,500 January 6 felons on day one, including many who violently assaulted Capitol Police. This is remarkable to me. All these people that are parading as law and order people who back the blue, just like these were thugs. I mean, the number of them have been subsequently arrested for low-level crime or for just like trash crimes, even after they got pardoned for the January 6 stuff. And for Andy to be part of a team that wouldn't even put up a plaque in Congress acknowledging the sacrifice that the Capitol Police made on January 6th, it's loathsome. So again, that's one that I would have to start with an apology. Was it appropriate to pardon state-sponsored drug trafficker, former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez? That's a big one for me because I care about what happens at the border. I think that it is a real epidemic. Arizona was hit especially hard by the fentanyl crisis, and to be pardoning people who played a significant role in the drug crisis that we've faced over the last 10, 15 years, and to have nobody within the Republican caucus make noise about it is like again, this is a moral table stakes issue. And then a little bit one that is maybe has less national oomph, but obviously is near and dear to my heart, given my role in this. And with the antagonist was number four was the 2022 election stolen from Kerry Lake.
Right. Which he recently it's like there's an article you responded to in which Biggs was asked about um Hobbs' election in 2022 and whether it was legitimate, and he said, quote, "I'm telling you, I think that she's the governor, and I don't think that anybody's questioning that she's not the governor." To which he responded, "Enough with the cutesy nonsense. Did she lawfully, accurately win the 2022 election?" I mean, I'm curious. It seems like he's going to try to kind of tiptoe around actually, giving a straightforward answer about the question. And I'm curious to know what you think about, whether, if that, approach is going to play over overall, or if, like yourself, people are going to see, through that.
Uh, Arizonans will absolutely see through that sophistry, and it's cowardly, and it's just, quite frankly, it's embarrassing. I mean, oh, Joe Biden was in the White House. Yeah, we know Joe Biden was in the White House. That's not what we're asking clearly here. Just sack up and say it, yes or no. It's really not that hard. And quite frankly, he's somebody who does know. He has the intellectual capacity to say, to figure this out, to ask questions, to investigate, to understand court cases. But again, if he doesn't weigh in on this, that's very telling to me. If he were to call up tomorrow and be like, "Yeah, I'm sorry I contributed to that environment. Yes, Governor Hobbs won lawfully, fairly, accurately." Then, I would love to have a conversation about how we can advance a limited government policy that will benefit Arizona and Arizonans.
Yeah. I think to the just a quick kind of aside, I think the question about Juan Orlando Hernandez and pardoning him is one that kind of slips by a lot of people. And again, I find that interesting as one of the ones that you put up here. Uh,
Look, I appreciate that because look, the president has pardoned some really reprehensible people in manners that are all too clearly transactional. I mean, people who invested in his stupid cryptocurrency got pardons. The founder of Binance, who gave millions of dollars into the Trump empire, all of a sudden gets a pardon. But on those, it's a little bit like, okay, at least he wasn't physically hurting anyone. And that's, the harm there is that the Trump family unlawfully or at least unscrupulously benefits. The harm with a kingpin for a drug family and for an international drug operation, people are harmed, they get addicted, and some of them die. And that's, again, especially acute here in Arizona, in a border state where we had immense problems under, of course, President Biden in particular, and salute for securing the border. But that was distasteful in the extreme, that pardon.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask too, I think from the tweet, obviously you're critical of some of the stances it seems like Biggs might be taking, but it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mean you're still open to voting for Biggs, as in somebody who voted to overturn the 2020 election, and so I just wanted to ask, how you would explain that, and in what worlds the kind of free market Republican ideology and support for those things that you mentioned overrides the danger that he may present to the electoral system, based on that and his decision in 2020
Yeah,
not to vote for certifying the election.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, these are just moral hurdles that you have to clear in order for me to assess a candidacy. And I will tell you that I'm by no means alone in this respect. This is the same as if I lined up perfectly with somebody on public policy issues, but he says, you know what, but I think we should intern all young men with a mustache and some wavy brown hair, which I'm sorry that would fall fatally on you. Then I would say, well,
That's
that's a
me being.
well, that's sort of a moral threshold question, and I'm sorry, I don't care how much we agree on school choice or what the effective corporate tax rate should be, which is 0%. I can't vote for you. And while I'm not saying that these are one to one on that, these are very important to me and to many moral issues that cut at the very heart of American governance and that the president continues to obsess over and even recently gave a 25-minute address over. And so I would only be able to consider Andy Biggs if he acknowledged this. Now, I do think that you should leave room for people to say, you know what, I was wrong in the past. That's grace. That's baked into a lot of American theology, and I think is important just as a human being. Yeah, I'll leave that door open.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, I think we're already starting to see, with his performance in the debate, that he's trying to, cast himself as, a more bipartisan member of Congress. Do you have any thoughts on that, and whether he can successfully kind of, I think the general consensus is that he, has been on the right wing, more conservative side of the party on a lot of issues, and chaired the Freedom Caucus, obviously. Do you think, that can be a convincing route that he can take electorally?
I don't know. Rhetoric does matter, and I think that somebody smarter is advising him than was advising Kerry Lake in 2022. So credit to them. And again, words do matter. But obviously, being one of the high-profile members of the Freedom Caucus, and the Freedom Caucus is by no means known as the group that cuts bipartisan deals within the Congress. But there are worse sins than being extreme in the pursuit of, in my mind, liberty and limited government, what the Freedom Caucus used to stand for. But for me, we got to get past a few issues first. Whether he can recast himself, I guess, remains to be seen.
Yeah. And then you tweeted related to the Secretary of State's primary right after I think on election day, you tweeted an early congratulations to Democratic Secretary of State Adrian Fontes. And after Representative Alex Collin won the GOP primary over Gina Swoboda. So I wanted to dive into that. Can you explain more about, why you think Collin can't win this one?
Yeah. Adrian's such a lucky devil. Boy, to have drawn Mark Fincham in 2022 and now to draw Alexander Kolodin, boy, you really couldn't have teed up two better people for him to run against. But stepping back a second, I proudly voted for David Schweikert in the primary, and I voted for Gina Swoboda. And while Gina and Adrian would maybe administer that office differently, I think Gina is a responsible person who would have lawfully executed the duties of the Secretary of State. And I think she has a good head on her, and I think she understands election administration. Alex has a good head on him. He's not an idiot, but he has taken some very unusual positions, and he is a flamethrower, and he, I think, is known as a bristly person to get along with, even at the state legislature. This is somebody who trashes even conservative icons. I've been with him when he's bashed Sandra Day O'Connor, when he's bashed Doug Ducey, when he has bashed Clint Bullock, and just generally sort of an unlikable person. But more to the point is the fact that this is the guy who was local counsel on the Kraken lawsuit following the 2020 election. And that was just craziness up the wazoo. Of course, the Arizona Bar Association ultimately reprimanded Alex for being part of that litigation that was wholly without any factual basis and just promoted the most ludicrous ideas about the 2020 election, including that former deceased dictator Hugo Chavez from Venezuela had a hand in manipulating the 2020 election. Just come on, you can't file that in a real court and not expect there to be repercussions. And Alex is also somebody who will be not exactly circumspect about the fact that he wants to end things like mail voting, which I actually think that you can have a legitimate public policy conversation about whether we should have mail voting. But his basis for it is just so afactual, and that's where I object. He's just been living in a fantasy land for the past 4 years, and I posted that because I think that just as Adrian cleaned Mark Fincham's clock, who ran in a similar vein. I think that with an even more favorable, potentially Democratic environment in 2026, I think that Adrian will have the biggest delta of the three major statewide races, the Attorney General, the Governor, and the Secretary of State. I think Adrian will win by the most.
We wanted to a couple years ago, before I joined the agenda reported on your bromance with Adrian Fontes. I believe the article was called Arizona's
Yeah. Who
Politics'
wrote
Weirdest
that?
Bromance.
Who wrote that?
Um, I think it was Hank.
Shame on Hank. Uh,
So we're wondering, are you guys still pals? Do you keep in touch
yeah.
at all?
So let me start with I have one romance in my life. It is with my wife. If I had to have another romance, and if I had to have a romance with a guy, I would think I would go like Channing Tatum, Ryan Gosling. Those would probably be my top
Adrian
famous guys.
Fontes isn't your type.
No, no, no. I'm nothing against Adrian's type. Nothing against
Yeah,
Adrian's
yeah,
type.
yeah.
But just like those guys, Andy Roddick maybe. Yeah, or some other celebrated professional athlete would also be a lot of fun. Um, Joking aside, uh, Adrian and I were obviously in close communication during his time as Secretary of State when I was still Maricopa County Recorder. I appreciated the commitment to the election process that Adrian had then. I appreciated that in 2024, when we wanted even just more people to help do ballot processing because we had a two-card ballot, Adrian pulled some of his staff and was there himself, and we did some ballot processing, very grunt work, even together, sitting across from each other. But really, my dynamic with Adrian changed in the wake of January 6th because I saw politics as having fundamentally changed. And again, just going back to some predicate questions about what our government is became more important to me than disputes over who administered what well and what should be your public policy preferences. Yeah, Adrian and I text on occasion, obviously less now. I have nothing to do with election administration anymore. And he lives in that world. I know a number of people in his office, and they're, I really am close friends with, say, someone like Elisa Mara, who's just a delightful human being and continues to work in that office.
Another question on that note. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on him starring in this public service ad for Arizona's ballot tracking system. At a time he's caught some flack, as have Horn and Kimberly Yee for kind of similar taxpayer funded campaigns that, are in the name of the office, but do promote their own name and images. So I was wondering if it related to Fontes, whether you had any,
Yeah, I know. I think that's a little bit of a sort of a tricky question. It's not unlawful. It's what Kimberly and what Tom and what Adrian did is not unlawful. And I think that they do have an interest in promoting healthy information about each of their three offices. Now, I also understand how somebody could perceive it as contributing to the benefit of their campaign. Some people might say, well, such is the beauty of being an incumbent office holder. I think that they're just, if we don't like it, then the state legislature should come up with a set of uniform rules and not just rely on this office holder putting up his own parameters, but this other office doesn't put her own parameters up. But this isn't new. Do I roll my eyes at some of it? Yeah, absolutely. Some of these ads are a little a little cringy, and I say that across the board. I'm sure people rolled their eyes at some of the stuff that I did while I was Maricopa County Recorder, including at the very end, we made this Diet Coke video to characterize how the different ballots were tabulated, and was I indulging a personal addiction a little bit in the presentation of that video? Absolutely, I was. But hopefully, it explained to one or two people exactly how ballots are tabulated in Maricopa County.
yeah. How many Diet Cokes a day are you on?
To quote, yeah, to quote Nelly from the song Grills, let's say I call out a number, let's say I call out a lot, and we'll leave it at that.
All right, great. So we've got to kind of finish up, some of this political analysis on these elections. I want to look forward a little bit too. We've you basically got three candidates at the top of the GOP ticket, who, to varying degrees over the past, 6 years or so, have a history of either election denialism or casting dispersions on the legitimacy of results or and so do you think all of these wondering if you think all of these candidates have a pretty good chance of losing, and if they do, how you think they might react to that loss? Do you see any of these candidates conceding, and what do you see as the worst case scenarios here?
I would imagine the worst case scenario is something akin to what Kerry Lake did in the aftermath of the 2020 election. But the reality is I don't think any of these people have even the oomph of Kerry Lake in terms of her national political profile. They might celebrate that they are not in that mold, and nobody is Donald Trump. And so I think that anything that they would do, and I'm not suggesting that they will, would be muted compared to anything that the president has done or will do. As to their likelihood of winning, voter registration statistics are still very much in favor of the Republican Party in the state of Arizona, and I continue to maintain that we are very much still a conservative state. Things like far left socialist candidates, stop the defund the police, those types of things just won't fly in Arizona anytime soon, which I think is personally something to be celebrated. And the president did very well in 2024. I think he wound up winning the state by about 5%. And so somebody could look at that and say, look, saying that the 2020 election was stolen was not dispositive in a loss for Donald Trump in the state of Arizona in 2024. And so, therefore, you can't assume that just because Andy Biggs has taken this position in the past, that he's going to lose in 2026. Now, the counterpoint to that is that in 2022, you had three full-throated election deniers running for Secretary of State Mark Finchem, Attorney General Abe Hamadeh, and Governor Kerry Lake. And I don't think that was a net positive for them. And I think it was actually a material negative, especially in 2022 when we were dealing with all the brouhaha, the cyber ninjas, and all that jazz. I think a lot of Arizonans were sick of it. I don't know if they're as sick of it anymore, but I still think it's a net negative. I think more challengingly is the fact that I think it could just be a crummy environment for Republicans to run in. The president's approval ratings are low. The Iran war has not been ended. Just today, gas prices went up materially again. And I think that we've seen over the past 6 years that lots of people in this state care about telling the truth about elections, but almost everyone in this state cares about prices and financial well-being and economic opportunity and lifestyle and security.
Yeah. Um, and then let's kind of move to another element of this election. I was just checking the Secretary of State's election results, unofficial election results webpage, and it looks like voter turnout right now is hovering just above 25%, which is pretty abysmal compared even to primaries of the past couple of years. So, what do you think that says about voter engagement in this cycle? And what are your thoughts on why it might be so low in this primary?
Yeah, there's undoubtedly a lot of factors, but Henry Thompson, who's a political science professor at ASU, recently co-authored or authored a paper for the Goldwater Institute in which he talked about the abysmally low turnout in odd year school bond, school override elections, and how that could have a distorting impact on what Arizonans actually care about and mapping it to the electorate. And in those elections, he said the average is about 26, 27%. So we're even below that. Turnout was incredibly low. And it's remarkable that so many of these seats will have been decided in this primary by a percentage of the population that's like really small and not necessarily reflective of Arizona at large. And I'm sure people will slice into the demographics and they'll say just how different the median primary voter was here than the median Arizonan. And then, of course, you further divide that by the political parties. As for the reasoning why, I mean, I have my hypotheses. Some people have pointed to when we moved our election to the middle of summer this time, we had it the third week of July when lots of people are traveling or out and about, or if they're fortunate enough at their summer home. We didn't have a U.S. Senate race on the ballot for the first time since 2014. The Democratic candidates at this top level didn't have any primary challengers, so there was no saucy primary on that side for the governor's race or something like that. On the Republican side, the governor's race had a far lower spend and far lower intrigue than in 2022 when Karen Taylor Robson and Kerry Lake were running against each other. I think people had chalked that one up for Andy Biggs quite a few weeks ago. So, and then just maybe you just didn't have that mega personality that, for instance, somebody like Kerry Lake was in 2022. But whatever it is, this is going to be our lowest turnout percentage in quite some time. We don't have the final numbers yet, but maybe even in this century could be our lowest turnout in a general statewide primary or statewide primary.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the election administration, the general consensus, it seems that this election ran very smoothly, and
Yes.
maybe that low turnout also played a role in that. But was what went well, in your view, as somebody with a pretty extensive knowledge of election administration, whether it was related to your office or the board of supervisors operations. What went well? Why was it so smooth?
So yeah, it did go smoothly, and I think it went smoothly in all 15 counties. So credit to every single county recorder's office, credit to every single board of supervisors elections office throughout the state of Arizona. Bravo. Yes, of course, lower turnout probably made things a little bit easier, but they still had to go through all the nuts and bolts, go through all the blocking and tackling, and execute this election. I'm obviously most familiar with Maricopa County, and that went very well in Maricopa County. I think that voters too are a little more informed about the process now. So, for instance, in 2022, I think the apple cart was overturned with respect to dropping off your mail ballot on election day. I think that's something that voters have become more tuned to. I was very delighted to see that the county, Maricopa County, pulled off such an excellent job with the new option of being able to take your mail ballot and tabulate it on site if you showed your ID, or showing your ID and dropping it off and having it pre-verified on election day. So congratulations to them. I think they got down to something like 50,000 early mail ballots still needing to be signature verified once polls had closed, and that represented like a third of what we had in 2022. So I only have positive things to say. I know that Maricopa County, the board and the recorder have obviously had their challenges and their disagreements. I know that the board for this election ran all in-person voting and also oversaw that new piece of the legal puzzle. I know that they also did ballot processing, and I know that some of that could be changed for the November election. But as far as this election went, everyone did well, and you won't catch me saying otherwise on the internet.
Yeah. And I want to get to kind of the responsibilities of the board and the recorder and what's been going on in that saga in a second. But I'm curious too if you were following uh, online, during on election day specifically, any attempts from kind of the, election integrity crowd trying to, point out or even play up issues, some of which turned out to be false, it appears. Did you see any of that, happening? And did you if you did, did you catch any sense of where that focus is? And it doesn't seem like anybody's really convinced of the little that they were able to, cast doubt on.
Yeah, I don't follow most of these lunatic lowlifes on social media, but some of the stuff does make its way to me because I see other people getting aggravated, or some of the members of the county will send it my way in frustration. I know that the guy with long hair, Scott something.
Yeah, Pat Pressler or something.
Scott Pressler, that's right. He had something to say about one of the voting locations that was way overblown, and that was an issue that was, if it existed at all, was very quickly resolved. I think something like that maybe comes from a good place. I don't know, Scott, but I don't think it was a net positive for the process. I don't think he was helping out the situation, especially considering he couldn't really do anything. Only the county could have done something. And then I understand that there was some of the usual chatter from Marissa Hamilton, which is really special because she's, of course, married to somebody who works within elections in Maricopa County for the recorder's office. And that's got to be especially grating and galling for the people who were just working in the election process and saying like, hey, why are we creating noise and drama when we're absolutely killing it out here and doing a great job? Yeah, I could see how somebody would be frustrated with that. But I think, outside of their small and disgusting quarters, I don't think it traveled that far.
Yeah. back to the kind of the responsibilities of the recorder and the board of supervisors. The first thing that I wanted to ask was, what do you think about the, recorder's role of debunking conspiracies that come up on election day? Because I know you had a solid hand in that back when you were recorder. And do you think he, lived up to that if it's, something you think is important?
Well, certainly he's taken a different tact. I think he's been, generally speaking, very quiet, and I think people like Dennis Welch have said that he's inaccessible. That's his decision. That's his prerogative. I felt at the time, especially in starting in May of 2021, with when the Cyber Ninjas came to visit, that clear, accurate information was important to understanding what happened in the 2020 election and would hopefully build confidence moving forward. So I thought that it fell on me to be the spokesperson for that. It fell on me then to receive a lot of the negative blowback for that. But that's one of the things that I thought I could contribute to my office. And I just think that it's fundamentally important. It saddens me that in 2026, there are only 60% of Americans who think that the upcoming November midterm election will be fairly accurately, lawfully executed. And I think that if that number goes down to a certain point, then I think a lot of the things that we take for granted in this country will no longer necessarily exist. And I think that the 18 to 29 demographic, are you in that demographic?
Barely, yeah,
Okay.
for a
The
couple more
18,
months.
your people, we've seen a lot of polling on your people questioning even like, why is a democratic republic like a good thing? It doesn't seem to be that awesome. I hear a lot of people trashing it. It seems like even our elections are, scams or something like that. Why not just go with, I don't know, like a strong man or a communist, I don't know, communist establishment?
Autocratic, more
And
autocratic state.
yeah, and I'm sure there are many wise people in your demographic, but that's all hogwash, ahistorical hogwash.
So, when you left office, you agreed to a new set of terms with the board for the recorder's office. They kind of reduced the recorder's role. Can you talk us through that decision and what was going on then?
Yeah, so in the summer of 2024, the board of supervisors, two supervisors in particular, approached me and said, hey, you're on your way out. We think that this would provide stability and continuity moving forward. I said, I'm happy to take a look, but I need three people to also be willing to sign off on it. The head of voter registration, the head of technology, and the head of early voting. And so they were the ones that were more involved in the details of that. Those three did eventually sign off on it. The board uh, continued to say that it was important to them. And so we executed that one, I think, either in September or October of 2024. And my assessment of it was that, look, they're going to have a new board, they're going to have a new recorder, whoever that may be. They can revisit that agreement. They'll probably go through a jurisdictional election or two, and then they'll see how the system works and they'll make some changes. Obviously, that didn't unfold that way. It took them much longer and it was much more acrimonious. The board and I inherited the agreement between Recorder Fontes and the then existing board when I stepped into office. We renegotiated that, I think, three different times. I don't think that there will be this continued back and forth. I had my disagreements with the board, but we always had a very good working relationship, and I just think that they were excellent human beings to a person, and I tried to keep that in mind, even if I lost patience with them at times, and that allowed us to continue to revisit the agreement between the board and the recorder. And I think that it's in some ways a shame that that will not be the case anymore because there will be a gross duplication of some resources. But they're the office holders now.
Yeah. And what's your assessment on the recently mediated agreement between the recorder and the board?
I haven't followed every twist
No.
and turn, and I by no means have any role, despite some people on the internet suggesting otherwise, in the negotiation of this. I understand that the recorder is going to be taking in-person early voting for the November election. I think the board is still going to have ballot processing, which was something that I was responsible for during my time. I think the recorder is going to be responsible for signature verification, which was something that I was responsible for in my time and that he just did for this most recent election. Um, you know, I wish them great success. I think the November general election will be more challenging because it could be a two-page, two-card ballot, and there's going to be a lot more people who are going to turn out than in this primary. And I wish them the best. I know the vast majority of people on both sides who are still working that process. They're good people, and again, just I wish them the best.
Yeah, what's your prediction on turnout in the general election? Do you think it's going to closely mirror, what we've seen, and that this was particularly low participation for, maybe
Yeah.
Democrat races? There weren't really a lot of competitive up ballot races going on, or
So I don't think it will be like so breathtakingly low as this recent election, but I don't think it will match 2022, and obviously won't match the presidential 2024. Not having a U.S. Senate race, I mean, Mark Kelly's fundraising is basically the GDP of a small country.
it's
Um,
astronomical.
Yeah, yeah. So when you have somebody who's raising north of $75 million, yeah, the get out the vote operation is going to be significant. Now, that being said, we'll still have, I think, two very robust gubernatorial campaigns, but they won't be on the level of Mark Kelly's operation. So I would say, 60.
Yeah. Gotcha. And then I wanted to ask about too. I mean, you know the recorder's office as well as anybody. What is the worst case scenario for an election denier to be running that office? And I guess if you were an evil recorder, what could you do and
Yeah.
really try? And I think this is something that a lot of people are don't necessarily, know the answer on it because the role is limited.
I mean, yeah, the sky's the limit, but on almost all of this stuff, you'd get sued immediately and then you'd be positively enjoined to do it. So, for instance, I'm not going to process voter registration forms, or I'm not going to send out mail ballots because I simply just don't believe in mail ballots. Well, okay, somebody would sue you immediately and then you'd be forced to do that, but that would still gunk up the system and certainly wouldn't make for a positive start to the 27-day early voting system process. You could, apply extra scrutiny to certain ballot packets, although you can't really, it's hard to do that would be very hard to do that based off a party. Um, I don't know how you would choose sort of the names that you want to apply extra scrutiny to. Look, it's happily a system that needs its defenders, yes, but it's happily a system that is not predicated on the good behavior of one person. And I think that's why no real election official just says, like, hey, Jim's a good guy and you should trust him, and therefore you should have confidence in the election process. People say you should trust the election system because it's tested, it's audited, it's transparent, it's bipartisan, and it has, as Ray, somebody who continues to work in elections, likes to say, has a lot of checks and balances in it, people watching each other.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. Um, so you need to I think just to wrap things up, I want to say thanks for joining us. Really glad to do this, but Wanted to know, about how you feel about, political office and whether you could ever see yourself running again.
Is that that's always the requisite question for no, I appreciate that. I love politics and I hope I'm having an impact on the political process, on the political conversation in my current capacity outside of an elected role. I think that we're in a particularly poignant moment in American governance, and so I'm continue to be drawn to that. I'm having too much fun right now. And also, I'm a bit of a fish out of water in the political party landscape. The party that I've been long a part of, the Republican Party, is wholly controlled by Trump right now, and I'm very much not a Trump person, and so that doesn't really have a path forward. But yeah, I don't know. Contribute how I can in the meantime. See what how the world changes in the future, and then keep reading Arizona Agenda in the meantime, and just knowing that it unfortunately doesn't come out until 9 a.m. when I'm on the East Coast. But it is my first read, and so keep up the good work.
Well, thanks so much, and we appreciate all the times you've spoken with us and contributed to our coverage. I actually do want to ask one more question. I think as a
Okay.
follow-up to that. What is it like to be that kind of like fish out of water, and to be standing by, some of these principles that, aren't necessarily represented at the high
Yeah.
levels of power in the Republican Party. And, are you just hopeful for a day when, maybe that old school, free
Yeah.
market conservatism and limited government stuff will come back around and be, the dominant strain of ideology in the party?
Yeah, it can be a little bit sad. Like last night, I wasn't terribly excited about most of the victories. I was like, yes, Kevin Thompson, great guy, pro market, pro energy, pro growth, sane individual. So I get excited about the some particular races. I was very excited for instance, in 24 that like Supervisor Galvin did well, that Rachel Mitchell did well, and so I pick my people and get excited, and I think there's a lot of Dems who have walked a very sensible manner, and I appreciate that too. And I am happy that the Dems in some of their primaries fought off some of the less sensible people in some of those. So yeah, it's not awesome, but I can always text Jeff Flake and be like, it's still not awesome, right? So
That's right. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. We appreciate it here at the agenda. And yeah, best wishes in all your things going forward.
thanks, and go Maroons.
Yeah,
We
crust
didn't
cuts
talk
the
about that.
Antia. We didn't. We didn't actually. Yeah, we didn't. What's your favorite memory of being at U Chicago, where we are both alumni?
Um, I remember mostly darkness and crossing the Midway and being so cold. I remember one day where it was minus 50 with the wind chill. Um, University of Chicago is a special place. I'm glad I went. It wasn't necessarily always easy by any stretch of the imagination, but it's an intellectually rich place. I think almost everyone who passes through knows that ideas are really valued there and that hard work is really valued there. Um, and I met my wife while in law school at University of Chicago. She was in my class with me. So I think just meeting her and meeting some of the other really awesome people. And while I don't would never want to live in Hyde Park, I'm glad that I made two stops in Hyde Park.
Yeah, well, perfect way for nerds to meet their significant others. You have a favorite class or one that left like a most meaningful impact?
Yeah. The professor, and I didn't really like him. I thought he was a little bit of a jerk. Is sort of one of those unnecessarily antagonistic people, but he fundamentally changed the way I view public policy and my way that I view law, and his approach to thinking about things really had an influence on me. It was just Saul Levmore, who was my torts professor 1L year. But the person I went there with and even asked for advice from when I was choosing graduate schools and law schools was Richard Epstein, who's a very celebrated libertarian legal thinker and just had an impact, profound impact. His books on how I thought he didn't necessarily translate into my favorite teacher. I think that might be somebody who's better in book format than in teaching format. He still keeps an affiliation with the university, though he's mostly retired, and he also teaches some classes at NYU Law.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, I think if, for me, you know, it's, you know, I took a lot of public policy classes and, you know, being an undergrad, you know, the core, so many different classes, but the one that I think has left an impact most on me is Little Red Schoolhouse. I don't know if you're
Yeah,
familiar, but yeah, Larry
yeah, of course.
McInerney. Yeah, that was, you know, at the time I didn't necessarily know I was going to be a writer and a journalist, but
Yeah,
that's to this day, I think all the time about a lot of those principles and put them into practice. So, sorry to
that's amazing.
everyone who,
They'd be thrilled to hear that because they pride themselves on the writing mechanics that are developed in that. And look at you now. Look at you now writing away.
yeah, no kidding, no kidding. Well, sorry to anybody who had to listen to us nerd out on U Chicago stuff here, but yeah, thanks again, Stephen. You take care, and we'll catch you next time.